And I need, you know, I have multiple screens up. I still need my reading glasses, but I'm somebody of a certain age. So thank you so much for coming, everyone joining us via Zoom for this presentation. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Rachel Nelson-Moeller. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations here at Lafayette. I'm also a member of the class of 1988 and the parent of a member of the class of 2021. And I'd like to thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation, The Art of Perception. It's part of our ConnectED virtual learning community series. Alumni Relations and the Council of Lafayette Women are very appreciative of you taking the time out of your busy professional and personal lives to be here with us. So before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items, although my guess is that a lot of you are probably pretty Zoom friendly by now. So first, please know that we have utilized the audience mute feature to ensure that we don't have any background noise or interruptions during the presentation. You are muted. We also suggest, it's totally up to you, but you may want to turn your video off if you don't actually want to be seen in the gallery, but if you want your video on, that's fine too. Just wanted to make sure that you knew that the gallery will be visible during this, so it's totally up to you if you want your video on or off. We absolutely welcome questions, and you can use the chat feature to submit your questions. We'll probably, Lloyd and Amy will answer those at the end, but you can submit them and I'll be monitoring those, and you'll be able to pose your questions to Amy at the conclusion of her comments. This presentation will be recorded and available for you and the rest of the Lafayette community to have access probably within just the next couple of days. So that's the boring stuff. I'd now like to move forward and introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Amy Herman is a lawyer and art historian who uses works of art to sharpen observation, analysis, and communication skills by showing people how to look clearly and closely at paintings, sculptures, and photography. She helps them hone their visual intelligence. Amy brings her art of perception to a wide range of professionals and leads sessions internationally for the New York City Police Department, the FBI, the French National Police, the Department of Defense, Interpol, the State Department, Fortune 500 companies, first responders, the military, and the intelligence community. This program has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the CBS Evening News, Smithsonian Magazine, among others. And her book, Visual Intelligence, was published in May 2016 and was on both the New York Times and Washington Post bestseller lists. And her TED Talk, A Lesson in Learning, went live in December 2018. Amy holds a JD and an MA in art history, but most importantly, she is a 1988 Lafayette College graduate who maintains close ties with the college, and she's brought the art of perception to a number of Lafayette groups over the last couple of years. I am so proud to call her my classmate and to call her my friend, and thrilled that she is here to take you on her fascinating journey into the art of perception. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you for that lovely introduction. As you were reading all these things, I'm thinking, who's she talking about? So I am really thrilled to be here, and it's just an extra joy and honor as I scroll through the names to see so many of my friends and colleagues here. So thank you very much to the college, and thank you all for taking time this afternoon. I am sure I can say almost without exception that you're all suffering from Zoom fatigue. So I'm extra honored that you were willing to come on this afternoon, but I hope to be able to relieve some of that Zoom fatigue. And I welcome your questions at the end and your comments. I do have a couple of rules for this session. The first one is, please don't write anything down. Even if you want to remember it, don't write it down. I've already written it down for you. I put up my contact information at the end. I've already made a digital summary of everything I'm going to say. I'd rather you experience the presentation. And the other rule that I have, that's the hardest to follow, is for the next 45 minutes to an hour that we're together, I want you to refrain from using 2 words in your thought process. And then I want you to do it for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. I want you to refrain from using the words obviously and clearly. And we do it all the time. Everyone does it. Why am I asking you to refrain from using 2 such commonly used words, it's because we live and work in a really complex world and nothing is obvious and even less is clear. So rather than thinking, well, obviously it's X, I would prefer that you communicate and say, well, it appears to me to be a case of X because of Y and Z. Okay, so those are my rules. You're not going to be looking at me. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. All right, I'm going to throw you into the deep end. There we go. Everybody sees the slides? Okay, so my opening slide. I was thinking, what's an opening image to capture your imagination and get you to think about how we communicate what we see? And I've chosen a painting by an artist named Philip Barlow. And if your initial reaction is to want to take off your glasses and rub your eyes and get them into focus, then the artist has done his job. This is a painting purposefully painted this way. And I love Philip Barlow's work because it's a reminder to all of us, we need to change our perspective. We need to clean our lenses every single day, especially now, because the world is changing so quickly that what I want to help people do is get past just passive seeing and think about active assessment and engagement. So if you want to, scratch your eyes and blink a little bit, then the painting has done its job. Here's a visual image. Now, I know you're all going to be very disappointed. There are no bullet points, there are no words, there are no graphs or analytics in my presentation. It's all visual images, and I think this is a visual image nobody wants to look at. Everybody knows what it is, and it has changed each and every one of our lives, but I'm not going to show you any more scientific configurations of the coronavirus, but we're going to be talking about it in the presentation today. I wanted to come up with a visual illustration of where we are right now, and this is the best I could do. This is Glenn Lycon's work of art that was created well before the world we live in now, and it's America. It's our beautiful country upside down. And while it hurts to see it like this, we need to be able to identify where we are. And my feeling about the pandemic, my work has changed, as has everybody else's, our lives and our work. But my goal for this pandemic and my work with my clients is we can't just survive this period. We need to thrive. We need to turn America back on its feet. And I think there are some positive steps we can all take. And I've just chosen looking at works of art to help you get there. We are in the restaurant business. They have a term that you're in the weeds. It means you're so deep in something that you can't see your way out. And I have to give a shout out for this photograph. My childhood friend, Peggy Clancy Draco, who is an amazing photographer, shared this photograph recently on social media, and I said, I need to use it. It is the best in the weeds picture I've ever seen. You can smell the grass, you can smell the weeds, you can feel them brushing up against your legs. And that's what I want the art to do. I want this to be an immersive experience, but give you tools that you can take away to help you do what you do more effectively. So thank you, Peggy. But I believe we're more than in the weeds. We're in trouble right now. And again, to give you a visual illustration in the art world, I'm showing you a work of art by one of my favorite artists. Her name is Cornelia Parker. And if you look on the left side of your screen, Cornelia Parker built this shed in 1991. And she called the work of art Cold Dark Matter. And I don't know how she did it, but she got the British Army to help her move her shed to her backyard, which is the picture on the right. And then, I don't know how she did this either, she got the British Army to help her plant a bomb, and she exploded the entire shed. She just, boom, exploded the shed and its contents. And then Cornelia Parker went into the field and she picked up all these charred and distorted and reconfigured pieces of the shed and the contents, and she created the sculpture on the right. And as I said, it's called Cold Dark Matter. And the reason I love it is it just illustrates so well where we are now. Our shed has blown up. Our shed, everything we know in the world has blown up. And what Cornelia Parker did is she repurposed, rethought, reconfigured each of the pieces that she found, and she built something that I believe is better and more beautiful than the original shed. And another thing that she did, there was one light that illuminated the inside of the shed when it was intact, and she decided to install just one light inside the new sculpture, not knowing what incredible shadows and dimensions that it would create. And as I say to my clients now, and I'm, working through this time with everybody, it's not only time to rebuild the shed because it's been blown up, and we didn't necessarily blow it up. There were a lot of factors that blew it up, but we need to rebuild. We need to rethink, we need to reconfigure, and we need to rethink where we're going and what we're building. What does that involve? It means taking a look at a sculpture like Los Colinos, that I'm showing you here in Irving, Texas, largest equestrian sculpture in the country. And it means taking a minute to just look. And if you do that and you take a deep breath and you just look at the work of art, you're going to realize that the horses are standing still and the water is moving. But if you looked at it quickly, you might not see that. So in this path to start putting things together and rebuilding and repurposing, we need to just step back and look. This is me in the morning, another visual illustration. I am in a million pieces in the morning. First thing I think of when I wake up in the morning is, what day is it? What's going to happen today? Where are we? And the artist Kumi Yamashita created this work of art by putting all these blocks on a surface and then shining one source of light to create the profile that you see on the left. That profile is created by light coming through the blocks. And it's what we have to do every morning. We have to pull ourselves together. We could be in a million pieces, kids running around, Zoom meeting at 8:30, breakfast on the table, somebody just threw up and the dog is everywhere, but we need to pull it together, and we didn't have to do that pre-pandemic. So I want to give you tools to be able to do that. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and I want you to just look at this painting. Just look for 10 seconds. Go ahead. Okay, now in the chat function, I'd like you to write down 3 things that you remember from that painting. You can just type them in, 3 things that you remember while you were observing the painting. And 2 women in hats, 2 women, wild turkey, young woman, old woman, chicken. Great. Beaded purse, rooster purse, green farm, beaded purse, glittery purse. That purse made quite an impression. All right, so you're all remembering different things. Hats, double chin, floral purse, guinea hen. Well done, well done. This is what you were looking at. This is the painting. And the reason I wanted to throw you into the deep end of the pool, the cold water, to get you thinking about how we communicate what it is that we see. And when you look at this painting, I only gave you 10 seconds. I realize that's an artificial constraint. There's a lot going on here. You have a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. You have a barn, you have a house, you have 2 people. The woman on the right is in profile. She's holding a needlepoint purse. She has a hat with a hat pin, and she has what looks like a fur stole on her jacket. And the person who's holding the hen, I'm not really sure what gender that person is. And there's some kind of dynamic going on between these 2 people. And so when I ask you to write down what you see, nobody sees the same things, and nobody prioritizes things the same way. And it's impossible to get it all in the 10 seconds of looking. So I wanted to give you an exercise just to throw you in and get you to start thinking about, how do I say what it is that I see? Okay. So now I can't see all of you, but I'm going to ask you to please raise your right hand in the air. Everyone raise your right hand. Okay. Take a look at the slide that I've put on the screen, and you can only put your hand down if you see something absolutely definitive in this slide that you could describe to somebody who wasn't looking at it. If you see something absolutely definitive, put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, I'm going to tell you that there's a mammal in this slide. If you see a mammal definitively and unequivocally in this slide, you can put your hand down. Some of you are turning your heads, Kathy. Some of you are looking this way. Okay, if your hand is still up, I'm going to tell you that this mammal has 4 legs. If you see a mammal that has 4 legs, you can put your hand down. Okay, now you can all put your hands down because you're getting annoyed with me, because I'm looking at all of you squinting. So let me show you what it was that you were looking at. This is an overexposed photograph of the work of art. And this is what you were looking at. You were looking at a cow. Now go back. Do you see it now? You can't unsee what I've just shown you, okay? This is not a trick of the eye. This is not one of those wacky optical illusions. Do you see the old woman or the young woman? This is a real photograph. It's called the Renshaw cow, and it was developed by a man named Dr. Samuel Renshaw in World War II to help Navy pilots see enemy warfare faster. But that's not why I show it to you. I show it to you because about 9 years ago, a man came to New York City to speak, and his name was Apollo Robbins. Now, for those of you who don't know who Apollo Robbins is, he used to be a professional con man. He was a professional thief, but now he works on the right side of the intelligence community, as do I. And I had heard about him and read about him, but I never saw him live. So I grabbed a friend of mine and I said, let's go hear Apollo Robbins speak. So we get to the door of the auditorium where Apollo is speaking, and there he is standing at the door shaking everybody's hand. Now, I didn't know what he looked like, and I just thought he was an usher, but I thought it was weird. Hello, how are you? Welcome. He grabbed my arm. Hello. And I thought, New Yorkers don't do that. Well, when I got to my seat, my gold bracelet was gone. Apollo Robbins took the bracelet off my hand in the few seconds that it took to shake my hand and welcome me to the evening. But he didn't just take my bracelet. He took people's glasses, he took their wallets, he took their belts. He took this whole sack of loot that he put in front of the room so we could all be collectively embarrassed. And so when I got my favorite bracelet back, I decided to listen to what the guy had to say, and he started with this slide. And he asked us to do what I asked you to do. Raise your right hand in the air and put it down when you see something absolutely definitive that you could describe to someone else. Well, my friend Robin, who went to the evening with me, put her hand down right away, immediately. And I'm thinking, is that a flying platypus in the upper right-hand corner? Or is that a kitten in the lower left-hand corner? Or is that an owl up there? I didn't know what I was looking at. And the harder I squinted, the less I saw. And to make matters worse, Robin elbows me in the ribs and she says, I can't believe you don't see this, Amy. So first I got nervous, then I started to sweat. This is what I do for a living. I help people enhance their observation skills. And I could have looked at this picture all day and I would have never seen the cow. And I don't know how many of you did see the cow, but I guarantee it's not as many who didn't. So I begin our session this afternoon with the premise that no two people see anything the same way. And we need to disabuse ourselves of that notion, especially now, especially with all the constraints that have been put upon us in this pandemic. You need to remember that nobody, not your spouse, not your partner, not your assistant, not your team, no two people see anything the same way. So I'm showing you now a painting from 1593. It's a lovely painting. You don't have to worry about dates or artists in my program. It's by a man named Giuseppe Arcimbaldo. What is it? It's a black bowl with some leeks and onions and turnips and some greens. It's lovely. It's a lovely painting. But the real power of this painting is revealed when you turn it upside down. And now you can see when it's turned upside down, it's called the vegetable gardener. And it reminds me of what the late Dr. Wayne Dyer said. He said, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. I'm going to say that twice. Change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. This is what I do in the art of perception. I travel around the world, or I used to travel around the world before there was a hard stop to flying. And I help people across the professional spectrum, leaders in all different professions, to change the way they look at things. Because you know what happens when you get good at what you do? You get micro-focused and laser-focused, and you lose the big picture. And I believe that that's dangerous for so many different people. So how did I get here and what do I do? I am a 1988 graduate of Lafayette College, yay. And again, it's so nice to see so many of my friends here today. And then I went to law school because I didn't get an art fellowship my senior year and I didn't know what else to do. So I went to law school and I hated it. I hated it so much, but I finished and I was a litigator for 5 years. And 5 years into private practice, I said, I cannot do this the rest of my life. And like many of you, I studied art history with Bob Madison, undergraduate. I knew where my heart was, and I knew that I had to get back to the art world somehow. So I left private practice. First, I went to the Brooklyn Museum. I was there for a short 18 months, and then I worked at the Frick Collection. And for those of you that know the Frick Collection, it is a gem of an art museum in New York City. And I worked there for 12 years, and I became the head of education. And while I was at the Frick Collection, I went back to school at night, and I got a master's degree in art history, and I did 3 years towards a PhD. And while I was at the Frick Collection, I started this program, The Art of Perception, but it was not my idea. they were doing the program at Yale School of Medicine at the Yale Center for British Art, and with Yale's gracious permission, I started a version of the program at the Frick Collection for Cornell medical students. And the idea was really simple. Bring medical students to an art museum, teach them how to look at all different kinds of works of art, and ask them to communicate what they see so that when they go back to the clinical setting, they'll be better observers of their patients. It really wasn't rocket science. Yale started it, everything was great. But one night I was out to dinner with some friends in 2004, and I was telling my friends that medical students don't just have vision like this, no offense to any doctors, but they also have vision like this. It was all about diagnosis and physiology and anatomy. They didn't know anything about the world, and they really didn't know anything about art, which was fine. And a friend of mine said to me, why are you just doing this for medical students? Why aren't you doing this program for people who really need good observation skills? And I said, like who? And he said, like cops. Why aren't you doing this for, you know, homicide detectives? And I thought, I don't know. Why am I not doing this for homicide detectives? So that was Saturday night. Monday morning, those who know me, you know I'm not shy. Monday morning, I picked up the phone and I cold called my local police department, the NYPD. And I want you to picture the guy at the switchboard. I said, hello, my name is Amy Herman. I'm head of education at the Frick Collection, and I have a great idea. I train medical students to enhance their observation skills by learning to look at works of art, and I think you should send homicide detectives to my museum. Well, there was dead silence, and I was transferred seven times, until a deputy commissioner picked up the phone, and he heard what I was saying because he said to me, Miss Herman, if this is such a visual thing, why are we on the phone? So 6 months later, every newly promoted captain in the NYPD had to come to the Frick Collection, take my class. Fast forward to July 25th, 2005, it made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And the headline read, to master the art of solving crime, cops study Vermeer at the Frick Collection. And boom, my world was like the shed. My world exploded. I got calls from all corners of the earth. And I got calls from every branch of the military and the FBI and the CIA and terrorism specialists and counterterrorism specialists and doctors and lawyers and nurses. And they all said the same thing, come teach us how to see, like you did those cops in New York. And the bottom line is I can't teach anybody how to see. I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't know enough about the brain. But what I can do, and what I'm going to do with you today, is demonstrate my method. Every new client, every new vendor, every new disease, every new tumor, every new crime, any new situation you're dealing with, you practice 4 A's every day. And again, you don't have to write this down. The first one is you assess your situation. You ask yourself, what do I have going on here? Then you analyze it. You prioritize your information. What's important? What do I need? What do I retain? What do I get rid of? Then you articulate it. You send an email, you send a text, you have a Zoom meeting, you tell your team, and then you act. You make a decision. You assess, you analyze, you articulate, and you act every single day, multiple times a day, but people don't seem to understand how intricately intertwined observation and perception are. So after the Wall Street Journal article appeared, I quit my job at the Frick Collection, and I don't work there anymore, and I do this full time. And it is now my honor and privilege to have trained 13 different divisions of my hometown police department, the NYPD. I train all new surveillance agents for the FBI, all new analysts for the CIA. I brought this program to NATO, to the IMF. I work with trauma nurses, critical response professionals, counterterrorism and deception specialists across the professional spectrum. And in my spare time, I've written this crazy book called Visual Intelligence. Now, I don't tell you all this to tell you why in my old life I was on Delta Airlines every day. You don't care about that. I tell you this because after training thousands of people, I have a really unique lens across the professional spectrum. And if you're in my session, yourselves included, you already have extraordinary observation and perception skills. That's not the problem. The problem, as I perceive it, is in the consistent breakdown of the effective communication of what it is that we observe. Something gets lost from here to here to here and to here, and I don't know what it is, so I'm using art to fill the gap. And for some reason, it is working. I don't know why it's working, but I'm doing it now virtually. I don't have enough days in the year to do and work with all the people that I want to work with. So I have 2 goals for you today in this virtual session. The first one is I want each of you leaving the session thinking differently about one aspect of your work. I don't know what that's going to be because you all do different things. And secondly, and probably more important and more tangible, I want to help you convert observable details into actionable knowledge. How do you better act based on what you observe? How do we go from passive seeing, as Sherlock Holmes said, to active assessment? So that's how I got here. I'm working on my second book because I'm on lockdown for 4 months. So hopefully my next book will be on its way. And that's what I'm going to do today. My course is not about Picasso versus Pollock. When I tell people what I do, they scratch their heads and say, wait a minute, you're teaching art history to cops? No, I'm not teaching art history to cops. I'm merely changing the visual data on you. I'm giving your left brain a rest, engaging your right brain so that when you go back to using your left brain, you see things more perceptively. And in case you're wondering, it's Picasso on the right and Pollock on the left. My session is about shifting your perspective, like this guy. His name is JR, for those of you who don't know, and just a shout out to all my Facebook followers who chime in on my art discussions every day. We're having a lot of fun out there and you're keeping me connected to the art world, so thank you. I want you to shift your perspective like this guy. His name is JR, and JR is what they call a photographer. He takes photographs of people, he blows them up to billboard size, and he puts them all over the world. Sidewalks, runways, tops of buildings, sides of buildings. But early in his career, JR had a problem. He never got a permit to do any of this. He just put his photographs wherever he wanted, and some countries didn't like it, and they issued warrants for his arrest. And while those warrants were pending, he was commissioned to do this self-portrait, and I think it's brilliant. It's called, I'm sure you've guessed it, Self-Portrait in a Woman's Eye, Kenya 2009. And the reason I think it's brilliant is JR shifted his perspective on what self-portraiture is. He took a picture of himself, and you don't know what he looks like. Why? Because if you knew what he looked like, it would be easier to get arrested, and who wants to get arrested? But I'm going to make the safe assumption that nobody in my Lafayette audience here today is trying to evade arrest. So I ask the question, why do you need to shift your perspective? Because this is your world right now. I didn't have enough room on my screen to put all the issues in that you are facing on a daily basis. The most contentious political landscape of our lifetimes. Your world is around Zoom, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, volatile markets, the coronavirus, climate change, masks, and Dr. Birx, and social media, and on and on and on. And there is no bright line between your work day and your living day. We live and work in the same world. And so we have to constantly change our perspective to wrap our head around all the issues that we're facing because they affect our home life and our work life. But why else do you need to shift your perspective? Because when you see the towers of Notre Dame burning, it's painful. Whether you're a Francophile, a student of architecture, or an art historian, or a Catholic, or a Christian, or just a citizen of the world, this is hard to see. But to really understand the impact, you need to step back and look at the big picture. So I ask my clients and my participants, don't just look at what you see, step back and ask bigger questions. Why is it a problem? Why is it upsetting? What's wrong with this? I also need you to shift your perspective to understand what goes into the decisions that we make. What assumptions, what biases, what affects us to make the critical decisions in our lives? So I'm using art to sort of get into our brains to understand why we do certain things and why we make the decisions that we do. I want you to shift your perspective in a positive way to understand, and all of you know this, brutally, you all know this, things change. Things change so fast and before our eyes. And what I'm showing you are 3 works, and you may recognize the painting in the front by Mondrian, the artist Mondrian. But the truth is, all 3 of these paintings are by Mondrian. The one in the upper left is 1901, the one on the right is 1917, and the one in the front is 1937. It appears that Mondrian changed his mind about how he saw the world and how he expressed himself, and that's okay. I applaud people that change their mind. It's when people draw lines in the sand and say, nope, this is how I've done it, this is how I've always done it, this is how I'm going to continue to do it. That's where we run into trouble. All I ask is that when you do change your mind, be able to communicate how and why and what persuaded you to change your mind. So to illustrate this, I want to show you a work of art by Jorge Mendez Blake. His work of art was about building a wall over Kafka's book El Castillo. Now, before you tell me the guy has too much time on his hands, stick with me. Okay, he built this wall, all bricks, no mortar. And as he constructed his wall, you could see that the book disrupted the symmetry of the wall. But as you got to the outer edges of the wall, you couldn't see the book anymore. But I want you to look at the book's impact on the entire work of art. What does it mean for you? One new idea, one new approach, one different way of thinking about something that you've done the same way for 20 years can have an immeasurable and significant impact, especially now because everything is new in this pandemic. I never want someone to say, you know, it's just too minor, I don't even want to give you my suggestion. I've seen small initiatives save companies millions of dollars, and I've seen small initiatives save hundreds of lives. Don't be intimidated to think about small changes because they really can have a monumental impact. One of the other biggest takeaways from the art of perception is the idea of potential. Now, I'm a sucker in New York. We have this problem. Every time it rains, these guys just appear out of nowhere, and they're in the subway, and they want you to buy a $5 umbrella. So I'm one of those suckers. I never have an umbrella when I need one. I buy the $5 umbrella, and the first gust of wind comes, and just my umbrella turns upside down. You know, everybody else's stays intact. So I took these pictures. Peggy, I'm not as good as you. I took these pictures, and that's my green umbrella on the left. This is my corner on 14th Street. But when I threw my umbrella away, I noticed something. I wasn't the only sucker. There were a bunch of broken, rejected, failed umbrellas in the garbage can. And it gave me comfort for about 30 seconds before I had to go down into the subway and buy another umbrella. But the artist Jean Shin had a different idea. She walked around New York City after 5 or 6 storms, and she pulled out all these failed, broken umbrellas, and she took out the handles and the metal, and look what she did with the fabric. She made this incredible sculpture in Dallas, and yes, it sways in the wind and it's beautiful, but ironically, when you stand under the sculpture, what does it shield you from? The sun. Now, I know that none of you, I hope none of you were walking around New York City after rainstorms pulling out broken umbrellas, but my question for you is, how do you see potential in things that fail other people? And more importantly, how do you act on it? I see broken umbrellas all the time. I don't do anything with them. But when someone tells you, no, that's not going to work, it doesn't work for me, what if you believe in a market or a client or a candidate or an idea? How do you communicate that worth? How do you communicate the potential that you see? Magritte did a beautiful job with it. He looked at the egg and saw the bird. And this is from 1922. My question for you is, how can we look at that egg differently? Because we are in a whole different world. How do we look at the egg and see the bird? In Japan, they call it kintsugi. Artisans and ceramicists, they make their bowls and their wares and their vases and their cups, and invariably some of them come out cracked or broken or asymmetrical. And rather than throwing them all away and starting from scratch, these artisans fill in the cracks with gold and silver and platinum. And you know what happens to these objects? They become more precious and more valuable and more unique than had they been perfect in the first place. I don't think I'm speaking to too many artisans or craftsmen or ceramicists today, but I'm going to ask the question for you. How are you practicing kintsugi? How are you solving problems with resources that you already have? Because let's face it, in this pandemic, none of us have the financial, human, or time resources to start all over again. It's a whole new ballgame, but we still have those resources available to us. So my question for you is, how are you practicing kintsugi? So how do I do this? How do I work with Navy SEALs, FBI surveillance agents, trauma nurses, and social workers, and make sure that they all leave my session thinking differently about their work? I ask them all to look at this work of art, and I say to them, okay, step in close to it. And as you step in close, I want you to ask questions. Who did this? How'd they make it? How long did it take them? What's it made of? And if you ask the right questions, you'll find out that this work of art is made of a wooden board, 10,000 nails, and one unbroken piece of sewing thread. The whole thing is made from one unbroken piece of sewing thread. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are thinking, wow, that's really cool. And others are saying, yeah, what the hell does that have to do with the work that I do? And the answer is everything. Because what unites all of you today and all the people in all my classes is all of them have to ask questions to elicit information they need to do their jobs. And I want to make sure that they're framing those questions to elicit specifically the information they need. Because nobody should say to you, can you repeat the question? I don't understand what you're asking me. Time is the most precious commodity. So is it about the art? Not at all. I'm just using art as a vehicle to get us to rethink and reconsider how we ask the questions to get our jobs done. And when I say time is the most precious commodity, I have an hour with you today. I don't have time for likes and ums and I don't knows and ambiguity, nebulous concepts. Your time is too valuable and so is mine. Use your time wisely and think about the most efficient way to communicate. It's probably the most important slide in the whole presentation. Mrs. Hannah Winthrop is her name. People who have taken my class know Mrs. Winthrop well, Mrs. John Winthrop. Let's figure out why she's so important. She has a red and white bow in her bonnet. She's a brunette. She's got dimples. She has lots of chins, lots of pearls, blue silk dress, blue and white bow. She's sitting in an upholstered chair and she's holding a nectarine in each of her hands. That's what we art historians do sometimes. We figure out what fruits people are holding. But I bet if I had the chance to ask all of you to describe this beautiful portrait of Mrs. Winthrop to me, 50% of you at least would omit that beautiful table from the bottom. See that beautiful mahogany reflective table at the bottom of the painting? More than 50% of you would just leave it out of the conversation. And I hear what people say. They say, oh, Amy, who cares about the table? It's about Hannah. But here's the problem. The table is hiding in plain sight. It's right in front of you. Have you ever said to a colleague or a friend or a classmate, have you ever said, how did I miss that? How did I miss that? If you say no, you're lying because it's the human condition. In our home here, I call it the mayonnaise problem. My 17-year-old son, who's in the other room, he goes to the refrigerator about 30 times a day. I'm hungry. So he goes to make a sandwich and he announces in his newly deep cracking voice, Mom, we're out of mayonnaise. And I say, no, sweetheart, it's on the second shelf with the lettuce and the cold cuts and the bread where we've kept it for the 13 years we've been living in this apartment. And I hear him take everything out of the refrigerator, puts it back in and announces again, Mom, we're out of helmets. Now, gentlemen, I don't want to make this into a gender issue, but when I get up off the couch and I go into the kitchen and I open that refrigerator, you tell me why that mayonnaise is right there. It's not because he's 17. It's because we don't see what's right in front of us. I don't worry about the mayonnaise, and truthfully, I don't worry about Mrs. Winthrop's table. You know what I worry about? I worry about when the surgeon knows that a patient has a congenital excessive bleeding problem, and that notation doesn't get into pre-op notes. I worry about when two police officers interview a witness to a crime, and somehow those notes don't get to the prosecutor, they fall through the cracks. I worry about that. So how do we make sure that a mahogany table doesn't fail you? How do we make sure that you don't miss what's right in front of you? And it's simpler than it sounds, but it involves the ego, so people don't want to do it. When you have a complex case, when you have a sensitive matter, when you have a difficult issue, you ask a colleague or a friend and you say, look, here's my situation, here are the facts, and this is what I plan to do. And then you ask the hard question, is there something here I'm missing? Because then you'll be amazed at what you hear. Why? Because no two people see anything the same way. And sometimes companies bring me in after Humpty Dumpty has fallen off the wall and they think I can put everything back together. And my favorite line to hear in this program is when someone says, you know, I would have never thought of that. I would have never thought of that. Music to my ears. It just gives you a broader perspective to make a better decision. And the problem with mahogany tables, once you discover one, they turn up frickin' everywhere. Everywhere. And you start thinking, oh my God, what else am I missing out there? What else have I not been seeing? So I show you now, and I'm going to bring the chat function back in here. I'm showing you two works of art. Can you type in, how are they similar or how are they different in any way? Just look at them. How are they similar and how are they different? Two white females reclining. They're both brunettes. They're both naked. Blanket versus no blanket. Posing on a couch. One asleep, one awake. I'm going to tweak that and say one has her eyes open, one has her eyes closed. Opposite orientation. Ah, with a question mark. Someone said, fat and skinny? Yeah, you don't need that question mark. One is larger than the other. And sometimes, I love this, voluptuous versus morbidly obese. Which is which? So I ask this because I can stand up in front of my class for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, until somebody says, the woman in the bottom picture is larger than the woman in the top picture, or the woman in the top picture is thinner than the woman in the bottom picture. It doesn't matter how you say it. But even that isn't the reason I juxtapose these two images. About 12 years ago, good question, what is beautiful? About 12 years ago, I was giving this presentation for a group of psychiatric physicians. And when I put these two pictures up and I said, okay, who's gonna tell me similarities or differences between these two works of art? And a very senior psychiatrist stood up, and he was from South Africa. He had the most beautiful accent I've ever heard, and he gave me permission to repeat his comments and repeat his observation. He said, the woman in the bottom picture is morbidly obese, and the woman in the top picture is perfectly healthy. And I said, you know, doctor, with all due respect, I'm not a doctor, but can you really tell me that the woman in the top picture is perfectly healthy? How do you know she's not schizophrenic? How do you know she doesn't have a blood disorder? How do you know her gallbladder doesn't bother her after she eats? And to his credit, in front of all of his colleagues, he said, oh, I can't believe how wrong I was. I said, you know what? You weren't wrong. Your choice of words was poor. And I'm going to tell you what I said to that group and every group since then. There are so few things that are 100% in your control. Choice of words is one of them. In writing, in speaking, in social media, in texting, don't squander the opportunity. Think about the words that you are using, because I work with people all the time, and as I'm listening to them talking, I'm thinking to myself, they can't possibly mean what they say, what they're saying. Know what you want to say, but know equally important what you don't want to say. Every word matters. And I will tell you that this program brought me to the White House 2 summers ago. I have to be apolitical in my work because I work on all sides of the aisle, but I was at the White House, and when I said every word matters, the oxygen sucked out of the room. And someone raised his hand and he said, if the president were not in Paris, but he were in the room, what would you say then? I said, I'll tell you what I would say, what I've said to his predecessors and what hopefully I'll say to his successors, is that when you are in a leadership position, people aren't just listening to you, they're relying on you. Think about every word. And I'm not speaking about political correctness. You know what I feel about political correctness? Don't worry about it. Worry about correctness. Get it right. So to that end, there we go. Take 5 seconds and take a look at this. And I want you to distill it down to one sentence. Type in one sentence or think about what you'd say or write it down to describe the painting you're looking at. One sentence. Go ahead. There's a lot to look at. Orange is not the new black. So if you're having trouble distilling all this information, the one takeaway from this is, how do we make order out of chaos? How do we take the barrage of information that is thrown at us every day on Zoom and on our emails and on our texts and our phone calls and distill it down to the title of my presentation which is Seeing What Matters? How do you put the filter on? And it means getting multiple perspectives, seeing what other people see, thinking about the first thing that jumps out at you, and then stepping back and taking a second look, because a second look is warranted. Do you remember I showed you the man who took a picture of himself in a woman's eye, JR? This is his work. This is what he does. And when I was writing my book, my publisher said, we want data. We want to know if this method works. Tell us that it works. So I did a test. I put this picture up in every class that I conducted for 6 months. And the test was, I asked the participants, you don't have to do it. I said, write 4 words to describe what you see in this photograph. 4 words. And I collected the papers. Do you know that 1/3 of the people that participated did not use the words face, painting, or photograph in their 4 words? And I thought, well, how could that be? What else could you say? People said a lot of things. They said stairs, hot, climbing, wires, ghetto, slum, favela, Rio, Brazil, boys, beer, boxes, trucks. They said all sorts of things. And I realized, I told you when I started this presentation 50 minutes ago that no 2 people see anything the same way. As I begin to conclude, I need to refine that for you and remind you that no 2 people prioritize the same way. You are accountable for your prioritizations. Because urgent and important are two different concepts. Urgent means right now, this minute. Important could be no less critical. It just has a different time factor. And what does it come down to? Choice of words. How do we talk about what it is that we see? Blah, 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 enough said. I've been talking for 50 minutes. You've been looking at works of art. What are your takeaways? I told you couldn't take notes. What are your takeaways? Number one, things are gonna go wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. I'd eat that donut if somebody gave it to me right now. I'd eat it right now. But we need to understand the consequences of our observations and be able to convert observable details to actionable knowledge. You own the diner, what do? You give the donut to a kid, do you throw it away? Do you give it away for free? Do you try to sell it? How do you act based on what you see? Number two, when you have the opportunity to look through a different vantage point to see something, take that opportunity. My editor took this picture on his knees, looking through the benches at Prospect Park in Brooklyn. I've seen the park 1,000 times, and this is one of my favorite photographs because I think of how differently I see the park looking through the architecture of a bench. When you have the opportunity to see it through a different vantage point, take the opportunity. Speaking of taking opportunities, a first glance always deserves a second. This is why we have trouble with eyewitness identification. What am I showing you here? I'm showing you a sculpture in Washington, D.C. that looks like a grandfather clock, a sheet thrown over it, and a rope tied around the center. But if you step in close, the way I ask you to, and take a good look at what you're looking at, you realize there is no clock, there is no sheet, and there is no rope. This entire sculpture is carved from one piece of white mahogany. The whole thing is carved from one piece of white mahogany. Look twice, because we can't depend on what we see the first time. Everything, a first glance always deserves a second. Big picture, small details. They're equally important, especially for leaders, especially in leadership. What do we have? Famous painting of the barmaid. And we have the barmaid standing looking at us. We have the marble bar, champagne on the left, bass ale on the right, oranges, a mirror behind her. You can see the barmaid's backside and even the customer she's serving. That's all the big picture. But don't forget to look here in the upper left-hand corner to see the trapeze artist's feet. That's why everyone's gathered in the first place, for the entertainment. And I'm tasking you with something that's not easy, to look at the big picture and see the small details, because they're equally important. When someone says, well, I'm a detail person, you're in danger of losing the big picture. The man who stole my bracelet is Apollo Robbins. He's become somewhat of a mentor and a friend to me, and he has this wonderful line that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them proportionally. I believe that great leaders are great listeners, and they laugh well too. The author Stephen Covey says that the majority of us listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And I just want to remind you of how much more responsive we can be if we actually listen to understand. And in this time of social injustice and racial upheaval, it is absolutely of paramount importance before we take action to listen to each other, to listen to understand and not just to respond. And once you listen and you make a decision, 4th A, when you act, it's all right to second guess yourself. I encourage people, second guess yourself. Did I do the right thing? Did I communicate as effectively as possible? Did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Because it will help you make a better decision next time. Not if it happens again, but when it happens again. I know many of you are not artists and artisans, but it doesn't mean that you can't be creative and resourceful in your work. Like this artist, Ella Natsui. He's a Ghanaian artist who makes these larger than life incredible sculptures. And he works in Nigeria. And what he does is he goes to parking lots and dumpsters of alcohol manufacturers, vodka and beer and gin, and he picks up the bottle caps and he flattens them and he hammers them and he sews them together to make this. And what I'm showing you, interestingly enough, is all the same work of art. It's called Grace and Gravity from 2010. And one of the things that I love about Ella Natsui is when his works go to museums, he doesn't necessarily send hanging instructions. So museums hang them as they see fit. And it's a reminder to all of us, no two clients, no two illnesses, no two crimes, no two suspects, no two families are ever exactly the same. And it is up to you to be able to distinguish and articulate the nuances and details among them. This is where we are right now. We are upside down, and that's okay. As long as we recognize that we're upside down, and as I said, we need to thrive on the other side, not just survive. Look for unity when you can. Look for a common thread to bring your narrative together. The sculptor on the right and the painter on the left, they never met each other. One's in Italy, one's in the United States, but we can find common ground, and sometimes that common ground is so compelling you can't believe you didn't see it in the first place. Look in the mirror at the end of every day. You're not going to see this. Ask yourself, what went right, what went wrong? How am I going to replicate what I did right, and how am I going to avoid what I did wrong? Because I believe that self-perception is critical to professional and personal growth. One of my favorite sculptures by Richard Serra reminds me of what the poet Robert Frost wrote, and it is so applicable to where we are now. The only way out is through. And we are deep in going through this, but I am confident we will get out. And if you take the effort to think about where you are and use your observation, perception, and communication skills, you will be better when you come out the other end. In the first slide, I asked you to adjust your lenses and rub your eyes. And now I'm going to ask you to look for light in new places. When you adjust your eyes to looking at this painting and you see that incredible source of light coming from the window, then slowly you adjust, you see that there's a man reading, and you see furniture, and you see urns, and you see the inside of the room. We need to constantly adjust our eyes, adjust our lenses and our perspective, because you can't get left behind. The world is moving too quickly. And my last slide, that is my website. If any of you would like a summary, a digital summary of my talk today, just send us an email at the Contact Us page. We'll send you an email. We'll send you the digital summary. Visual Intelligence is my book. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. That's where I am on Twitter. But more importantly, outside the social media stuff, I wanted to give you a visual illustration of looking at your work and your world before and after our session together today. And I've chosen 2 slides by the artist Chuck Close. Now, for those of you who don't know who Chuck Close is, he's a very important 20th and 21st century portrait painter. He's paralyzed from the shoulders down. He has minimal use of his fingers, and he paints with a brush in his mouth. And the tapestry on the left is Chuck's self-portrait from 2005. There's nothing wrong with seeing the world this way. It's a bald white man with green eyes, round glasses, a goatee, and a t-shirt looking right out at you. My hope is that after our short session together, you'll begin to see your world and your work more like Chuck's portrait done 6 years later. He broke down every quadrant of information. He made it more compelling, more colorful, more interesting, more complex. He lowered his glasses so he wouldn't miss the big picture or the small details. And I believe that if you think about those 4 A's, if you choose your words carefully, if you're aware of your biases, your assumptions, if you frame your questions to elicit the information you need, I think it makes you a sharper professional and a more interesting person. And yes, Ellen, I'm going to tell my story. My son is, I'm on the road all the time. And well, I used to be before this hit. But when my son was little, I tried to be in New York as much as I could to take him to school and be around for him. And we live on Union Square, where all the protests are. And took my son, dropped him at his little kindergarten in the West Village, and I'm jogging home across 12th Street to get some exercise. And a man comes out of a building in a wheelchair. He's got a rope tied around his midsection. He's walking the cutest puppy I've ever seen, little Labrador puppy. I love labs. Now, New Yorkers are fussy. You have to ask permission to pet their dog. So I said to the man in the wheelchair, "May I pet your dog?" "It's so cute." He said, "Of course." So I got down on the ground and I rolled around with the puppy, and I got dog hair and dog slobber all over me. I stood up, cleaned myself off, thanked the man very much. I continued east towards 5th Avenue. He wheeled towards 6th. Something made me turn around and take a second look down 12th Street. You know who the guy in the wheelchair was? It was Chuck Close, a man whose work I have studied, revered, presented, written about for 20 years. But I was so focused on that puppy dog that I didn't realize who was sitting literally right in front of me. There's a whole world in our background, in our periphery, and even in this time of pandemic, it's even more important that you clarify your line of sight and you bring it back into your line of sight to help with the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for having me today. And I would love to open it to questions in the chat room, if that's okay. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. Stop share. There we are. Okay. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Amy. So I'm been so immersed in your talk that I was, oh, I have to watch the chat room too. So every time I hear Amy speak, I learn something different. So as I'm scrolling back, so the first question that we had among all the accolades that we had here in the chat room, how does seeing this way impact your daily life?
How does seeing this way impact my daily life? My brain is tired because I feel like I'm looking all the time, not only as a matter of personal safety, but I have learned the concept that I try to practice every day, especially now, called perceptual empathy. And what perceptual empathy is even if you don't agree with where somebody else stands, acknowledge where they're coming from. You can't stand in everybody's shoes because of who we are and what we do and how we were raised and where we went to college. We can't necessarily see what other people do, where they're coming from, but just acknowledge where they're coming from. So I try to practice perceptual empathy on a daily basis. Our worlds are so strange right now. I haven't left for 4 months, and I see the world differently, and I make it a practice to try to see the world differently. I used to tell people you could practice this on the New York City subway every day. Just get on the subway and look around and form a narrative of your head, in your head, of what you see. But I don't get on the subway right now. So make it a daily practice and it will become automatic. My poor kid, he's grown up with this. He looks at everything differently. We look at everyone and everything differently. And again, I want to thank the people who chime in on my art conversation. Looking at art, I hope, gives us the tools to look at the bigger picture of our world writ large, because we need as many tools as we can get. Any other questions?
Yes, among all the accolades. And we are recording the session as well as the chat, so Amy will get to see all of your comments. So Amy, don't worry about trying to read everything while you're also speaking. The next question that came in was, you talked about applying this to police, military, doctors. How do you think about this for the corporate environment?
I do a lot of work in the corporate environment, and it's very interesting because one of the things I enjoy about working across the professional spectrum is I bring concepts from one group to another when they wouldn't necessarily intersect. And what's interesting about working in the corporate sector is I always talk to the people that are planning the event or the conference where I'm going to speak, because I want to find out what their objectives are. Often corporations bring me in after there's been an incident, or there's a hierarchical issue, or there's a communication issue. But what I love most about the corporate sector is when they bring people in from different departments and we make it an interdisciplinary presentation. So it's not just all the analysts in one department, or it's not all the M&A people in one department. Sometimes we bring in the support staff, and I work across the corporate structure in financial services, and I work in hospitality, and it's always very interesting to see why they bring me in and what they're looking for. But I enjoy it because we're starting to dismantle some of those really rigid hierarchical limits that we've had in the corporate world. And I came from the corporate world in my law practice, and it's nice to now turn it around and be able to open a window in corporate practice.
Now, we had a question that is a little more a personal question, and I guess I would also love to know the answer to this. Is your son going to Lafayette?
No, my son is not going to Lafayette. And, it's interesting. I learned also, I tried to practice perceptual empathy when I brought him to campus a couple of times. And I have such love for campus, and I'm so strongly connected. And I wanted him to have the same thing. But the number one thing I heard at every college is, this is my son's search, not mine. And he's a baseball player, and he's going to play baseball. But the other interesting thing, he's going to Manhattanville in Purchase, New York. And the interesting thing he said to me is, during the pandemic, Mom, college is a whole different thing. He said, half the kids he knows are taking gap years. And he said, college, people are perceiving of college differently because they don't even know what they're coming back to. And so I never want to take for granted my college experience of moving in freshman year and having this whole experience. But my son is well equipped to deal with this because of the generation they've been raised in. And I have a lot of confidence in the class of 2020. And, you know, while I would have cheered him on at Lafayette, I cheer him on every day. He just had surgery this morning on his arm because he plays baseball, and he's recuperating in the next room. And I'm cheering him and the whole class of 2020 on, college and high school, because they've got the world cut out for them. So
that is the perfect mom answer.
And I'm far from the perfect mom.
And actually, Peggy weighed in, and she asked when book number 2 is coming out.
Peggy. Book number 2 is, I'm working on 2 books, actually. I'm trying to create a teenage version of visual intelligence for kids, for looking at art, because I think the concepts are readily adaptable. And the second book, I'm in the weeds. I'm deep in the weeds on book 2, and I'm hoping spring of 2021 is what I'm aiming for, but pandemic has changed everything in the publishing world. So we'll see what happens, but my fingers are crossed. Oh, Mary Austin, who would I want to play in my movie about my work? Yes, there's going to be a series about my work. Thank you, Mary. Fox Television bought the rights to visual intelligence. And they're going to make a television show based on it called The Art of Perception. And there was one actress, and her name is escaping me now. They're looking for someone who's like 35 and looks like this, which I don't. And I tried to tell the producers that you can't do what I do and be 35. I've been around the block. So they're looking for somebody who is experienced and older, but it's not going to be that. I think it's going to be highly fictionalized. And as of right now, the main character's name is going to be Amy Herman, which is a little creepy. Fictionalized your documentary. Totally fiction, Margie. Totally fiction.
This is a great question. What is something on campus that you see differently every time you go back?
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you right away is the student body. I love the diversity. I graduated in the class of 88, and the difference in the classes from 88 to now is mind-boggling in the best possible way. I see international students, and I see just people. I want to talk to so many people, not that I didn't love my class, but I see the campus growing and expanding in ways. They're growing with the world. It's becoming a global campus, and it's not just on the top of the hill. People are going all over the world and doing things and going down into Easton. And, you know, I love to go back to campus, because I will tell you the one thing that doesn't change is when I ride up the hill from the bottom to get to the top, my heart just skips a beat, like I'm coming home. And you all know that feeling, whether you were moving back in September or whether you were coming to visit, your heart just, you go up that hill. And I remember driving in college, I wasn't sure my car would make it up the hill, but you have that feeling of coming home, and that never gets old. So I hope I can continue to keep coming back.
This question, how has Instagram changed the way that we see?
It's a great question. Instagram has changed everything about the way that we see. And I have to say that I am really delinquent. And after this, I will start posting on Instagram. It is kind of, and I don't want to use ephemera in the negative sense, that we can capture what we see and share it with people. And I think Instagram is brilliant in that way. I tend to post my works of art with no comments, no titles, because I want people to rely on their inherent sense of observation. And I think Instagram demands that of you. People are constantly posting images and piquing your curiosity. And when I tell my homicide detectives or my trauma surgeons, if you come away from my session with more questions than answers, that's fine. That's the way it should be. And I think that's what Instagram does. You're looking and you're asking all kinds of questions. Who did this? How did they do it? What do they want me to get out of it? So I think it changes how we see our world profoundly. And I need to use it more often because my whole world is so visual. But yeah, it's been a huge change. More than Twitter, might I add.
Time for one last question that I see in here.
Sure.
So conversation is a two-way street. So when we open our own perceptions, what are the best ways to also help the other side of the conversation, the other side of the situation, have an open perspective?
Yep. There are a couple ways. But the first one is at the conclusion of a conversation, there are ways to leave doors open. I always talk about people, when you walk through doorways of success and you have a successful meeting or a successful deal or promotion, ask the other person or the other side or your team, is there anything we didn't talk about today that you wanted to? Are there any issues that are left unaddressed? Don't leave things on the table. And also, wrap up and make sure that everybody knows what you want your takeaways to be. Because let me ask you this, have any of you ever gone to a meeting for an hour and come out and said, what was that about? I'm sure that's never happened to any of you. And so I make sure that when I have a session, we wrap it up. I give people digestible tools, things that they can take with them. But I always ask the question, what didn't happen? What expectations were not met? And I want to hear your feedback so next time we do this, we can make it more productive. So leave it with a question and listen to the answer. Nobody, I believe this, has to have the last word. Even though I just had the last word? No, sorry.
Thank you, Amy. I know there were a couple of other questions, but you haven't even had a glass of water during this whole thing. So go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to take a sip of my water.
And things that we could certainly go on and on. And
can I answer Dory's question really quickly?
Absolutely, of course.
Just one more. Hi, Dory. She asked, what words of wisdom would you give to our new college graduates trying to find their way related to the art of perception? And I chose it not only so I could say hi to Dory, but also it's a really good question because 2020 is like no other year we've had. And what I would say to the graduates, what I say to my son, and what I say to college and high school graduates is keep your eyes open to every opportunity because the world is changing every single day. And instead of putting your earbuds in and drowning out the world, engage in conversations because I believe the best opportunities are right in front of your eyes. My agent sat next to me on an airplane and we started talking and I had a headache and I didn't want to talk to her, but I did. And when I left that plane, it was a life-changing conversation because she published this book and it's in 9 languages. Graduates need to keep every single opportunity open and look and listen because you never know what's right in front of you and what it's going to turn into. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on my website. I will read the chat room. I just want to thank you all. Time is precious, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to spend it together this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. As I said, we could probably all sit on here all night. So it really, as I said, every time I hear you speak, I just learn so much. So thank you to you. Thank you for everyone to join us this afternoon. As I mentioned, this is being recorded and should be up in the next couple of days. I'd like to draw your attention if you enjoyed this and want to continue to join our ConnectED talks. Our next one is actually on June 23rd, next week, entitled What the Pandemic is Teaching Us About Sustainability. It's June 23rd at 7:30, and it's with Professor Kira Lawrence and our Director of Sustainability, Delicia Nauman. And you can view and register for this and any future virtual talks and events by going on leopardlink.lafayette.edu. Lastly, we will send an evaluation. I'm pretty sure I can guess what the responses will be on the evaluation, but it also certainly helps us refine and plan future programming. This is uncharted waters for my staff and me as well. So we want to make sure as we put together this programming that it is what you all want to experience. So please take a couple of minutes when you receive that to complete the evaluation. And that is all that I have, except for, I hope that you all stay well and look forward to having you all back on campus whenever we can get back to campus.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks to the whole alumni office, and thank you to Lafayette Women for co-sponsoring this. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.